Hello and welcome back to another episode of WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. I'm George Oprah, editor-in-chief of the Western Journal, and have you ever noticed that every time I say that, I look down at my notes like I can't remember my own name? Every time. I do remember my own name. It's George Oprah, and I'm editor-in-chief of the Western Journal, reminding you as always to subscribe to the WJ Live show wherever you watch us or listen to us. So you'll always get the truth about the news of the day from people you can trust, people like these two ladies with me today. Today I'm going to do something that I don't normally do. I'm going to ask you to do one other thing for us. But it's free, doesn't cost you a cent. It'll take you like 15 seconds. Please, we really want to make this show your show, not our show. So we want to know what you want in your show. So please leave us a comment today, wherever you're watching or listening. And I want you to tell me one of three things. You can do all three if you want, but I really want you to do just one of these three things. Tell us what you'd like us to start doing on the show that we don't do now, or what you'd like us to stop doing on the show that you don't like, or something that you really do like and you want to make sure we continue doing on the show. It's that simple. Stop, start, or continue. We want this to be your show. I promise you I will read every single one of those comments. Personally, I will take them up with our producer and our director, and we'll see what we can do. I can't make any promises because I don't know what you're going to comment. But we want WJ Live to be your show, and I need you to help me understand how we can do that better. So please leave us a comment. If you think everything's perfect, just say that. We'll be happy to read that. On today's show, reporter Abby Liebing will update us on the current state of the attempt by the barely democratically controlled Senate to rescue some portion, any portion, of President Joe Biden's agenda at this point. And assignment editor Tara Snyder, I spelled your first name wrong, Tara. Tara with two R's, Snyder. Can't believe I did that. Has some information about how vaccine mandates are affecting some already struggling American cities. But first, Baltimore State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby is back in the news. If that name sounds familiar to you, it has been a little while. Mosby is the prosecutor who charged 6 police officers in 2015 with second-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter charges, other crimes as well, were related to the death while in custody of Freddie Gray. That name may also sound familiar. Gray was a 25-year-old black man arrested for possession of a knife. He had a fairly minor criminal record, some drug charges and minor crimes. Gray was not secured properly in a police van when he was being transported and later died due to spinal cord injuries sustained during the drive. The medical examiner, because Gray hadn't been secured in accordance with departmental policy, said he had to rule the death a homicide. So this was another case of a black man, one of the early cases actually, and what seems to be a spate of them in recent years, dying while in police custody. There were, of course, violent protests following Gray's death. It should be noted the death shouldn't have happened. We should also note that the protests shouldn't have happened. At least 15 police officers were injured during those. 34 other people got arrested. And then after Gray's funeral, local businesses were burned. The governor had to call in the National Guard. It was a whole thing. Eventually, the 6 officers who had been charged were tried, or rather 4 of them were tried. 1 got a mistrial, 3 were acquitted, and after that, all of the remaining charges were dropped. So none of the police officers were convicted of anything, and in fact, I believe all 6 have since sued Mosby for her prosecution of them. At the time, she got a lot of criticism for overcharging the officers. Yeah. These charges were filed well before any serious investigation could have been completed. And so there was a lot of accusation that she was doing it for fame, to get in front of the cameras, and in some cases to maybe quiet or head off some of the protests that did in fact happen. But now the tables have turned. Yesterday, a federal grand jury chose to indict Ms. Mosby on 4 counts. She faces charges of perjury and, quote, making false mortgage applications in the purchase of 2 Florida vacation homes. That's a quote from the Associated Press. who talked to the U.S. Attorney for the District of Maryland. The charges are related to Mosby's alleged lies about meeting qualifications for coronavirus-related distributions from a city retirement plan in 2020. Prosecutors say Mosby lied on multiple mortgage application forms when she attempted to buy homes in Kissimmee, Florida, and Longboat Key, Florida. Mosby and her husband, Nick Mosby, who's currently president of the Baltimore City Council, I will note, already live in one of the tonier sections of Baltimore, a historic district called Reservoir Hill. And Kissimmee, there's nice and not so nice places in Kissimmee. Longboat Key is an expensive place to buy a house.
Yeah.
So the accusations and alleged discrepancies did not stop there, however. There have also been accusations of misuse of campaign funds to pay personal lawyers. Federal subpoenas have been issued to a couple of churches in regard to Nick Mosby's contributions there. And both Mosbys were reportedly issued a lien by the IRS after not paying property taxes for 3 years. They have since then that was paid. That hasn't been confirmed by anybody but them that I know of. The current charges, perjury charges, carry a maximum sentence of 5 years in prison, and the two mortgage-related offenses could carry with them a maximum of 30 years each, according to the AP. Remember that. Don't lie on your mortgage applications, folks. All right, so are you guys surprised by any of this, that a state's attorney in Baltimore would be indicted for something like perjury and making false statements? These are federal indictments, by the way.
No, not surprised. She does not have a great track record. I was shocked when she was reelected in 2018 after the whole, really just how her office has run almost everything.
Yeah.
But she was reelected, and so I just don't think anybody should be surprised that all of a sudden she's lying. She owes federal back taxes, and it's just a huge mess. I don't think it's any surprise at all.
Yeah, even this morning, I didn't even really recognize her name, just to be completely honest, but just knowing her involvement and her willingness just to kind of jump with the mob on these police officers, I think it kind of just shows this kind of tendency with people who seem to be on the left, just this kind of like underlying a little bit corruption that seems to follow them, because we hear them talking all the time about Trump's family and his kids and what they're doing, and it's like, what's the worst thing that they've done? Like, I can't really think of anything besides maybe a controversial tweet from Don Jr.
Right.
And so I just think it's interesting that time and time again we see these people who claim to have the moral high ground and moral superiority actually having these like actual crimes underneath them.
Well, yeah. And here's the thing. Anybody who lives in the Baltimore area and has kind of seen the city deteriorate since 2015. I lived close to Baltimore for a couple years. Like everybody, it's clear to everybody that there is extreme corruption.
Yeah. And the murder rate's been skyrocketing over the past 7 years or so.
Yeah.
Right?
All throughout her time in office, almost every crime across the board has just gone through the roof in Baltimore. She's done nothing.
Yeah.
So it's really no surprise.
All right. So we have to remember she's innocent. In America, we're innocent until we're proven guilty. And someday I'm going to be accused of something, and I will be happy when people treat me that way, except that they won't. But I'm going to try to follow the golden rule and treat her the way I would want to be treated. So she's innocent at the moment. She hasn't been proven guilty yet. But if you had to bet, how do you think that this is going to turn out? Do you think, there's any chance of her being found guilty on any of these charges? And B, if she is, what kind of penalty do you think the current state's attorney for the city of Baltimore is going to incur? Keeping in mind that the maximum looks like it could be, 70, up to 70 years. I
predict she is not going to go to prison. I think that she probably will be found guilty, but will make some sort of sweet deal. And she'll probably lose her properties and have to pay back certain back taxes. But I think it's kind of, the same old song, same old game of most public officials. Even if they're found guilty, end up cutting a deal that's really good.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think it'll be a slap on the wrist. I think that's what happens every time. I think we've seen that, like, one of the most prime examples with was with Epstein, you know, like we didn't even really get to see the full fruition of his case. And then he mysteriously fell off the face of the earth despite telling his psychologists he wouldn't. So I think that there's like just an interesting thing when you have power where you suddenly seem to just be above the law, whether or not we like it.
Yeah.
Well, and it's about having really good lawyers. I mean,
Yeah.
when you're state attorney, you have
She probably knows some.
you're gonna find the loopholes.
Yeah.
It's like-
Yeah, and one thing that I will say before we move on, if I were her, a former prosecutor, well, a current prosecutor, but assume she's found guilty, I would assume she would be disbarred. We'll see.
probably.
But a former prosecutor being put in prison amongst a bunch of people you prosecuted, that's not a future to look forward to. So
Be a major problem.
yeah, I actually would probably advise her to make a sweet deal to
Yeah,
avoid
exactly.
that prison
It's
time.
like, yeah, you don't want
that
her
would
in
be
prison.
probably worse for her than some other people. All right. So speaking of overindulged, privileged individuals,
Goodness.
Abby, we have an interesting situation setting itself up in the Senate right now.
The Senate is going nuts. Okay. Here to bring everything up to speed, Joe Biden's agenda is falling apart, but Democrats are desperate to try to make it happen, particularly in the voting rights area. So that's why Joe Biden was in Atlanta this week, fierily talking about how his legislation needs to be passed. The problem is we got a 50-50 Senate. Republicans are absolutely not going to pass it. But Chuck Schumer is saying we absolutely have to pass it because it's the only right thing to do is, this voting rights legislation that is supposed to, eliminate gerrymandering and all these horrible things that are wrong with our voting system. But everyone knows that it won't pass. And so then Chuck Schumer instead is saying, let's force a vote on the filibuster rules where you have to have a 60-person line for the vote to pass. And so he basically wants to change the rules in order to push through legislation. The problem is you have to have every single Democrat on board with changing those filibuster rules. Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema from here in Arizona are against it. It's a lose-lose situation, and yet Chuck Schumer just last night, he said he is still going to force through the vote on Tuesday.
He really just seems dead set on it.
He's dead set on it, even though everyone knows it's dead in the water.
Yeah.
Even voting rights activists over the weekend were talking about how it's just dead in the water and Joe Biden's wasting his time campaigning for this in Atlanta because it's not going to happen. And yet Chuck Schumer is just like, seems to be a little bit on his own planet. Right. I don't know. I want to hear from you guys why you think that the Democrats that Chuck Schumer is so desperate to push this through when it doesn't seem like there's any chance.
Well, I think Democrats are just used to ramming through legislation. Like, that's our one criticism in the office is that we always say, whenever Republicans get power, we all breathe this sigh of relief. And then they leave and we're like, oh, what'd they do? Yeah, what'd they do?
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Credit to them. Like, they have formed the habit of getting stuff done, even if it's not really actually doing anything. It would be nice to see Republicans in office actually taking initiative, whether or not it's like a valid one or not. But yeah, I think that they're just dead set. And I think it's going to be another thing where they can point to. I think it's actually strategic because if I were them, I would look into 22 if I'm a liberal and say, oh, this is not going to go well. What's something we can do? Oh my gosh, we don't have Trump as a scapegoat anymore. Let's blame Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. We can point to them and be like, oh, look, we tried to solve voting issues. We tried to solve everything. But look, those two, they stopped everything. We'll have to try again. Vote. Like, that's what I think that they're going to do because they don't have anything else at this point. Like, I saw on Twitter today that even, I think it was CNN or MSNBC said Biden's terrible week. That was their headline on the news. And so everyone unanimously agrees for the first time in forever that things just aren't looking good for the admin. And I think that lesser Democrats are starting to panic.
Yeah.
It's a little surprising, I think, that Chuck Schumer is so adamant
Yeah.
that he's going to force this vote because, I think you're right, Tara. I think what they're doing is kind of setting up scapegoats. But those two scapegoats are members of his party.
Exactly.
They're both Democrats. It's not going to be an opportunity to run. We could have had this voting rights legislation, but no. Senator Tom Cotton, held it up. It's not Cotton. It's two Democrats. So I often ask on this show the question of dumb or dishonest when we're talking about leftists in particular. Is somebody being dumb or dishonest? Chuck Schumer has many faults, but he is not dumb.
No.
He is not a stupid man. You don't get to be in the position he's in by being stupid, which only leaves me with one option. But I don't understand what the point of his dishonesty here. It's one of these weird situations where I'm like, I'm pretty sure he's lying somewhere about something, and I can't tell you why.
Yeah, really, I think that Chuck Schumer, it's kind of a thuggish move that he's...
That's what it feels like.
Yeah, and I think particularly everything revolving around Joe Manchin has just been, Chuck Schumer and the Democratic senators just being like the mafia thugs.
Right.
Of just like, well... if you ain't voting with us, we're going to ruin you.
Right.
And I think it's just, the increasing thuggishness of our Congress.
And what the heck is Biden doing going to Georgia?
Oh, yeah.
Why don't you go to West Virginia
That is so
or
funny.
Arizona and try to put pressure on the two senators?
He was hunting down the governor of Georgia, Stacey Abrams.
Right,
they were
exactly.
looking for
She still
her. She
hasn't
wasn't in
conceded.
office.
Well, and she did not show up at his event either.
Oh, she very publicly snubbed him.
Yeah,
but you
there were
can't
a
blame
lot
her.
of prominent, particularly black Democrats in Georgia who did not show up to support Joe Biden at
the
that
Black
speech.
Lives Matter co-founder publicly condemned him and said he should not be in Atlanta.
Yeah.
I am not going to the events.
Well, that, and it's like when Joe Biden said like explicitly that he was going to choose a black woman as his VP, it was pretty much Kamala Harris and Stacey Abrams. Like those were going to be the two. So she's probably feeling double snubbed because she's no longer the governor of Georgia and she's not the VP. So I mean, maybe it's more smart on her move to just not even associate with this failing administration.
Well, it is smart because she is running for governor again, and so to be associated with someone who has a 33% approval rating and everyone in Georgia hates. It's
Right.
like you don't want that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she got a lot of free press out of it. The fact
yeah.
that she didn't go. So, gosh, if I could, I'd be hard pressed to imagine a worse potential VP than Kamala Harris. But Stacey Abrams would make that list. She would be terrible.
She would be terrible, but I will give to Stacey Abrams that she would do something rather than just be
she'd try anyway. Yeah, I think you're right.
Than to be completely inactive like Harris.
I don't think my blood would completely boil listening to Stacey Abrams talk because Kamala Harris's condescending tone just like makes me go into battle
irksome.
mode. But it might have like a gentle simmer. Like I think that might be the difference for me.
I'll tell you my theory on that, Tar, and I have no way to prove or disprove this. Probably nobody will ever know. When Joe Biden made that promise about a woman of color being his vice president, I think he meant Michelle Obama. And then I think Michelle Obama said, nope.
Yeah.
That's what I think happened.
I think she said nope.
Just my personal theory. I have no way to know.
Well, no, I agree because my personal theory is that Michelle Obama is going to pop back up for presidential candidate in the coming years.
Oh my gosh, that would
and
be
she was
devastating if
not
that
going to run
We
with
shall
Joe
see.
Biden if that's the plan.
Yeah.
I can't imagine she would think that Joe would win
Not
against Donald Trump.
not to completely
2020,
like
so.
change subjects, but if she were to run, because I know like we've seen in the news that Hillary is like supposedly lurking in the
Still floating
shadows.
around,
So
yeah.
do you
Always.
think if it came down to a Michelle Obama / Hillary showdown, who do you think would like win that nomination?
Michelle Obama.
I think
Yeah,
it'd
Michelle
be
Obama. Okay, me
Hands
too. I
down.
thought it was pretty
Hands
much
down.
like, yeah. Oh, that would be such a crazy bloodbath.
And now we probably should completely change the subject. Tara,
yeah.
You've got some vax mandate information for us.
Oh, yeah. It's the news that everyone's super sick of hearing for the last 2 years. I'm sick of repeating it every time I come on this show. But it just gets crazier and more dumb every week. So there's been multiple cities burning and multiple things happening, but I think the one most charred is the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. If you remember, during the George Floyd riots, that made national television because people were burning down historic businesses, black-owned businesses, in predominantly black areas. So tell me how that shows Black Lives Matter. I don't know. So if someone can enlighten me in the comments, I'd be interested in hearing.
We
But-
could call Stacey Abrams. Maybe she could tell us.
Yeah. So now they just kind of put in a final nail in the coffin on the Twin Cities, which is absolutely devastating because I remember being like 15 and going down there 16 years old and walking around Minneapolis and taking Instagram photos with my friends. And now I'm like 21 and when I go home and visit my parents, like, you are not allowed to go into Minneapolis under any circumstances because the whole thing has radically changed. Carjackings are up. Well, now we have even more of a reason not to go down there because the two mayors of Minneapolis and St. Paul implemented this vaccine mandate. And so they said that in order to go into a restaurant, a diner, or anything like that, that you had to either show proof of vaccination or you had to show a negative COVID test that was officially taken like by a medical third party, like within the last 72 hours, which is incredible considering that it takes usually about 2 days for those tests to turn around. But the thing that just doesn't make sense, which multiple people have pointed out, is that if you're vaccinated, and at this point we know that you can still be vaccinated and have COVID-19 and spread it, that those people can go in and dine, potentially COVID positive, but someone who's unvaccinated and clearly doesn't have COVID can't dine at all. So it's really just come down to this whole idea of Dr. Seuss's Sneetches Upon the Beaches with green stars and whatever. It's like, you can't roast marshmallows at our bonfire, get out. And so it's just so stupid. Well, I was very impressed because I was scrolling on Facebook yesterday and I didn't see a single comment from Minnesota saying that they supported this. Every single comment was negative about it. And a bunch of small businesses and executives in Minnesota came out and had a few choice words to say. And I kind of stopped reading quotes in recent episodes, but this is worth it. So this is from the Minnesota Licensed Beverage Association director, Tony Chazek. He said, "We understand the seriousness of COVID and the public health for community, patrons, and employees. The hospitality industry has complied with all of the mandates, regulations, and more for COVID, but it's hard to understand a vaccination mandate that's unjustified and unscientific. It targets just one industry after zero science or data driving the decision. There's zero care for our dedicated frontline workers who will now have to add enforcement agents to their plates. And the only scientific thing we know is that it has devastated the hospitality industry and other cities with similar mandates." So then he continues and he says, "They say we're all in this together, but this mandate shows that even the hospitality industry is clearly being targeted alone. We know that both vaccinated and unvaccinated individuals can spread the virus, and it happens at schools, workout facilities, other retailers, sporting events, and more." So people are publicly starting to say what we all been saying for a long time.
Yeah, for 2 years.
And I think
Yeah.
it's really interesting because like if this were to go on 2 years ago, people like businesses were dancing around it,
Yeah.
like, oh, we want to care about public health. So
Well, there was so much less known
There was
2
so
years
much
ago.
there was so
Right.
much less
Now we
known.
know.
So my question is, because we know so much more and apparently the government doesn't, why do the mandates seem to be getting so much stronger?
Take that.
Control. Trying. I
There you
mean,
go.
it's a control issue. And one of the hardest things for government to control is business, and particularly small private entities. You know, your Main Street economy is basically the hardest thing to control, especially in cities. That is the key to an urban development and economy. And but it's also at the same time, it's key, but it's also uncontrollable. And so I think it's like, oh, easy way to control this, and bring it under city governance, and even moving up the chain up to federal government is to do vaccine mandates. I mean, look at it's. Everyone just has to look at the model of New York. I mean, New York has all the vaccine mandates. They're operating like this. They've been operating like this for well over a year. And it's really clear to see what the game is, and also what the outcome is in New York. So 2.0 in Minneapolis.
Yeah. I see. So I think there are a couple of root causes here. One, I totally lay so much of this blame at the feet of the establishment media, who just hypes up COVID and has been doing it for almost 2 years now as something that is far more dangerous than it really is. And look, COVID can be dangerous. I know people who've died from COVID. Okay, I'm not trying to say it's not. Yeah. And I know people right now, we have Western Journal employees and relatives who are positive, and a couple who are quite sick. And our thoughts and prayers are with those folks. So I'm not trying to say COVID's nothing. There are people saying that, and that's garbage. That's just not true. But it's not what the mainstream media makes it out to be either. And so it's very easy. If all you do is listen to Rachel Maddow and Jake Tapper, shut down everything. Yeah. We're all going to die. The fact is, the mandates themselves show you that this disease is not that dangerous. Because if it were the bubonic plague, we'd all quarantine ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
Because we don't want to get it and die.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not the bubonic plague. Most of us don't really care about getting it all that much. Again, if you've got pre-existing conditions or whatever, I'm not talking to you here. But like I've said dozens of times, like somebody who has COVID, come over and hang out with me for a while so I can get it and be done with it.
Yeah.
I just want to be done with it. If it were really dangerous, that would not be my attitude. I don't say that about prostate cancer. And, COVID's the only thing I say that about. So mainstream media is a big thing. I also will say that early on, some people did not ask the right questions when they should have been asked. I remember very early on, one of the first things that shut down were movie theaters. People weren't going to movie theaters.
Yes.
And somebody should have said, who caught COVID at a movie theater?
Exactly.
Because nobody had. The answer to that is no one. And yet they shut down movie theaters. Well, how is that? What science is that following exactly? There were very early on questions that should have been asked. There was resistance that should have been put up, and it wasn't. And so we find ourselves here.
Unfortunately, I think it's just another case of governing entities. They follow trends. They do not follow science, data, logic.
Yeah. There's so much more polling data that they follow, and the polling data is influenced by the establishment media.
Yeah.
So,
And just speaking of things that completely and totally don't make sense and just like literally melt my mind, is the fact that when the Supreme Court, they just came out with their ruling yesterday, and they said that the blanket mandate for OSHA, they're not going to stand, so Biden can't implement that one through OSHA. However, the mandate for healthcare workers stood, and to the best of my understanding, that's for any healthcare worker facility that accepts Medicare, Medicaid, federally funded, and that's the vast majority of them. So Babylon Bee made this joke. It's like everyone can decide for themselves their own health decisions based on the first SCOTUS decision, but no one in healthcare can.
Right.
Which
the people qualified to make those decisions are allowed to.
Ironic. Yep. And the thing that really irks me about this is because I have a few family members who are nurses who are in healthcare, and a lot of those people have been hesitant on getting vaccinated for various reasons, which I think are many of them valid. But now they're inviting people who are positive with COVID, who are vaccinated, back to hospitals because they're so desperate, but they're kicking out people who aren't vaccinated, who don't have COVID, just as like a punishment at this point. And so it's like, so if the whole point of kicking out people who are unvaccinated was to protect the people in hospitals from COVID, then why are we firing them? Why are we leaving nurses who chose to be vaccinated scrambling every day at work to try and cover the bases for their coworkers who were forced out? It's not fair to the people who are unvaccinated, and it's not fair to the nurses who are vaccinated.
This one really is about control. No question. What you have and it's happening in healthcare, it's happening in the military, it's happening in law enforcement, it's happening in all of the areas that the left would really like to control. People who refuse to get a vaccination are being kicked out. Well, who are those people? They are not generally leftists. Conservatives are being kicked out of the military, the industrial complex, big media. Not that there were too many left in big media at this point, but so big tech, healthcare, all of these vital key functions in the United States are bleeding conservatives. And who's going to be left to run them? It's about control. It is completely about control.
Right.
Yeah. I don't even know. It's just like, I mean, what do you think, Abby?
I'm honestly a little surprised, especially at the healthcare mandates, because when you look at hospital business structure, these are multi-million and billion-dollar businesses. that are already struggling because of staffing, because of, I mean, just the havoc that the pandemic has wreaked on hospitals. And so to then further knock out your own workers, I know that SCOTUS, passed the mandate, but I actually just do not see it being upheld because I don't think it's practical. I think you'll see a deterioration of hospitals, which is kind of inevitable when, the federal government gets a hold of institutions and gets the control, as there's going to be a deterioration.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't even know if things can change going forward, but I do think it does come down to control and just things like that. I mean, yeah, I don't even know what to say beyond that.
Yeah, no, it's tough. And on that happy note, a final reminder for all of you to please leave us a very quick comment. I'm not asking you to take 5 minutes and write me an essay. I don't know if you could write an essay in 5 minutes. That's probably a bad example. But just a quick comment. Start, stop, continue. What would you like us to change, or what do you, about WJ Live, do you really not want us to change? Just a quick comment. Wherever you're watching or listening, we will look at those, and we're paying attention. We want this to be, as I said before, your show. So please take the 15 seconds that takes, and just leave us a thumbs up if that's all you want to do. We'll take it, and honestly, we'll be grateful for the encouragement if we get a few dozen or even a few hundred thumbs up. That will be a great day for us. So with that, we must bid you farewell until next time. We'll be back to bring you truth every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern and 2 p.m. Pacific. We'll see you again next time on WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. Stay safe out there.